Clara Whitcomb stood on the courthouse steps with soot on her sleeves and the whole town, whispering that she had burned her own deed to steal a dead man's ranch. The auction bell had not yet rung, but her future was already being sold in the street. Beneath a sky the color of hammered tin, across the square, Sheriff Gideon Hale held a silver wedding ring he had ridden 2 counties to find, and he knew the ashes in Clara's stove were not the only things someone meant to erase. One wrong word would brand her a liar forever. One quiet truth could make the killer turn his gun. Before we begin, let me know where you are watching from. Leave your country name in the comments below. And if you love stories about courage, loyalty, and community, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next stories by 9 o'clock that morning. Every porch along Mercy Creek's Main Street had someone standing on it. The barber leaned against his striped pole with a towel over one shoulder. The blacksmith had stopped mid-swing, hammer dangling in his fist. Women from the church sewing circle gathered beneath the awning of Diaries Mercantile, whispering behind gloved hands, as if whispering made cruelty respectable. Even the children had been pulled close by their mothers, warned to watch but not speak. At the center of it all stood Clara Whitcomb, alone. Her dark traveling dress was too plain for a woman who had supposedly stolen land, and too clean in its cut for a beggar. But the sleeves told a different story. They were streaked with gray soot from the fire that had licked through her small back room just before dawn. The fire that had taken the paper everyone now claimed she never had. The deed, the only proof that old Samuel Whitcomb had left her Willow Bend ranch before he died. Convenient fire, Mrs. Tully said loud enough for 6 people to hear. Mighty convenient. Clara kept her hands folded around the handle of her carpet bag. Her knuckles ached from holding it too tight. Inside were 2 dresses, a Bible with a torn cover, a photograph of Samuel Whitcomb standing beside a horse he had loved more than most men, and a scorched corner of parchment that no longer carried enough words to save her. County Clerk Albright stood on the courthouse steps in a brown suit that pulled tight at the buttons. He held a stack of papers beneath one arm and a little brass bell in the other. "Miss Whitcomb," he said, though he made her name sound borrowed, "this proceeding is not meant to humiliate you." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. Clara lifted her chin. "Then, you have chosen a strange place to hold it." The laughter died in an instant, not because Mercy Creek respected her, but because people liked their victims silent. Albright cleared his throat. "The county records show no completed transfer of Willow Bend Ranch. Mr. Whitcomb carried debts at the time of death. Mr. Silas Crow has presented a legal claim through the bank. Unless valid proof of ownership is produced before this bell rings, the property will be auctioned to satisfy debts he never owed," Clara said. A man in a black frock coat stepped out from the courthouse doorway. Silas Crow was the banker of Mercy Creek, though he had the smooth face of a preacher and the eyes of a man counting coins at a funeral. His son, Caleb, stood just behind him with a smirk tucked under his blonde mustache. "Miss Whitcomb," Silas said gently, and somehow that gentleness made Clara colder. "Grief has made you reckless. No one blames you for wanting security, but wanting a thing does not make it yours." She lived under his roof, someone called from the crowd. "A.A.'s charity," Mrs. Tully answered. "He found her after her mother died." Everybody knows that. Everybody knew pieces. Nobody knew the shape of the whole. Clara had been 9 years old when Samuel Whitcomb brought her to Willow Bend in a wagon with flour sacks under her feet and fever in her blood. He never called her Charity. He called her Child. He taught her to read brands, set bread, stitch a harness, and stand straight before fools. For 12 years, Willow Bend had been her home. Then Samuel died in March, coughing blood into a handkerchief while spring snow pressed against the windows. 2 days before his death, he had signed the deed in front of witnesses. Clara had seen the ink. She had touched the paper. He had folded it and told her, "Take this to the clerk when the weather clears. Don't let Crow see it first." But weather, grief, and a broken bridge had delayed her. And then the fire came. A train whistle blew in the distance, long and lonesome, beyond the cottonwoods. No one turned toward it. All eyes stayed on Clara, waiting for her to break. She would not give them the pleasure. Clerk Albright raised the bell. Hooves struck the far end of the street. At first, people only shifted. Mercy Creek heard horses all day. Freight teams, ranch hands, drifters, soldiers passing toward Fort Laramie. But this horse came hard. Iron shoes biting sparks from stone, breath ripping white in the chilly air. A gray gelding tore into the square with dust flying behind him. The rider sat low in the saddle, hat pulled down, coat dark with trail sweat. He reined in so sharply before the courthouse that the gelding slid 2 feet. Sheriff Gideon Hale swung down. He was not a large man in the way Caleb Crow was large, broad and loud and fond of blocking doorways. Gideon carried his strength quietly. He had a lean face darkened by weather, a scar beneath his left eye, and a way of looking at a person that made Liz feel poorly dressed. His badge was dusty. His jaw was unshaven. In one gloved hand, he held something small, wrapped in a blue handkerchief. "Hold the bell, Mr. Albright," Gideon said. Albright frowned. "Sheriff, this is a civil proceeding. Then it can wait 30 seconds while the law catches its breath." A few men chuckled before Silas Crow's glare silenced them. Gideon climbed the steps and stopped beside Clara. He did not touch her. He did not speak to her first. That hurt more than she expected. For 3 weeks, he had been the only person in Mercy Creek who listened without telling her what grief had done to her mind. Then he had ridden away, without promising where or why. She had told herself not to trust a lawman. Lawmen signed papers. Lawmen obeyed men like Crow. Lawmen arrived too late. Now he opened the handkerchief. In his palm lay a silver ring. It was plain except for 3 tiny wheat stalks engraved around the band and a deep scratch across the inside curve. Clara stared at it as if it had risen from a grave. "That was Samuel's," she whispered. Silas Crow's face did not move, but one hand tightened over the head of his cane. Gideon heard her, though he kept his eyes on Albright. "This ring was pawned in Bent Rock 2 nights ago by a man using the name Ellis Rusk. Bent Rock's deputy recognized the description I sent. Rusk is one of Crow Bank's hired collectors." "Gall." Gideon turned his head slowly. "I have the pawn slip." Silas smiled with the patience of a man watching a child spill water. "Even if this ring belonged to Samuel, it proves nothing about our deed." "No," Gideon said, "not by itself." He looked then at Clara, and for the first time that morning, the public square seemed to fall away. His eyes were tired, not doubtful, not cold, tired from riding hard and carrying something heavy. "Miss Whitcomb," he said, "did Samuel seal private papers with this ring?" Clara swallowed. "Yes. He hated wax seals. Said they were for governors and rich fools. He pressed that ring into lampblack and linseed, then marked the fold." "And did he mark your deed?" "Yes." Albright shifted uneasily. "A seal cannot replace a missing deed." Gideon's hand closed around the ring. "No, but it can prove the burned paper in Miss Whitcomb's stove was not the original." A murmur moved through the town like wind through dry grass. Clara turned. "What?" Gideon looked toward the crowd, then to the courthouse window above them, where someone had just let the curtain fall. "The original deed might still exist," he said, "and whoever burned Clara's copy knows where it is." That was when a gunshot cracked from the alley beside the library. The courthouse bell flew from Albright's hand and clanged down the steps. The crowd screamed and scattered. Gideon shoved Clara behind the stone post so fast her shoulder struck granite. His revolver cleared leather, but whoever had fired was already gone, swallowed by horses, dust, and panic. Clara pressed a hand to her racing heart. On the step where she had stood, lay the blue handkerchief. The silver ring was gone. For one wild second, Clara thought Gideon had dropped it. Then she saw his empty palm, his narrowed eyes, and the dark shape of a boy darting between wagons with a slingshot in his fist and terror on his face. The shot had not been meant to kill. It had been meant to make the ring vanish again. Gideon ran before anyone else moved. He went down the steps, cut through the crowd, and vaulted over a hitching rail with the easy grace of a man who had spent more years on horseback than in chairs. Clara followed because staying behind felt worse than danger. "Clara," he shouted. She ignored him. The boy vanished behind the feed store. Gideon turned the corner first. Clara came after him, skirts caught in one hand. The alley smelled of grain dust, manure, and spilled kerosene. A stack of crates had toppled. Beyond them, the boy struggled beneath Gideon's grip, kicking like a trapped rabbit. "I didn't shoot," the boy cried. "I only grabbed what he told me." "Who told you?" Gideon asked. "I don't know." The boy was no more than 12. His face was thin, his cap too big, his boots tied with twine. In his fist, he held the silver ring. Gideon took it gently. "Name, Tommy Bell." Clara knew him. Everyone did. His mother washed clothes behind the saloon. His father had vanished after a card game 3 winters before. Gideon crouched to Tommy's height. "Did a man pay you?" Tommy's eyes flicked toward the street, then back. He said, "If I didn't, my ma would lose her room." "Who?" "I can't." Gideon's voice softened. "Son, someone fired a rifle over a crowd of people. The next shot might not miss." Tommy began to cry without making noise. Clara stepped forward. "Was it Caleb Crow?" The boy's face gave the answer before his mouth refused to. Gideon saw it too. His expression hardened, but only for a heartbeat. Then he put a hand on Tommy's shoulder. "Go to the jail. Sit inside. Tell Deputy Amos you're under my protection. You hear me? Protection, not rest." Tommy nodded and ran. Clara waited until he disappeared, then turned on Gideon. "You knew there was another deed?" "I suspected. And you let them drag me onto those steps?" He flinched, not from anger, but because her words landed where shame already lived. "I rode through the night to stop it." "You rode through the night with a ring while they called me a liar in front of every soul I have to live beside." Sigh had to know it was Samuel's. "You could have told me. I didn't want to give you hope I couldn't prove." The alley fell quiet except for the crowd still buzzing beyond the feed store. Clara's breath came hard. She hated that he stood there, looking pained instead of defensive. A defensive man was easier to despise. "You are still a sheriff," she said. "You still decide when truth is useful." Gideon looked down at the ring in his hand. "I used to decide too fast." Something in his voice changed. Clara wanted to ask what he meant, but Silas Crow appeared at the mouth of the alley with Caleb behind him and 2 bank men standing like fence posts. "Sheriff," Silas said, "I demand that you arrest that woman for interfering with county proceedings and slandering my son." Caleb's face reddened. "She accused me in public." "Not yet," Gideon said, "but give her time." A few men who had gathered nearby laughed under their breaths. Silas stepped closer. "Careful, Gideon. A badge is not armor. The county pays your wages, and the county has grown tired of your sentimental habits." Gideon slipped the ring into his vest pocket. "I was hired to kiss, not protect your pride. You have no warrant, no proof of a crime. I have a stolen ring, a pawn slip, a paid boy, a gunshot, and a burned deed somebody wants badly enough to steal twice. That will do until supper." Caleb's hand drifted toward his coat. Gideon's eyes went to it. "Try me tired, Caleb. It might improve my mood." Caleb froze. Clara should have felt relieved. Instead, dread moved through her like cold water. Men like Silas Crow did not retreat. They stepped back only to see where the ground was soft. Gideon turned to her. "You cannot go back to town alone. I can go wherever I please, he said, and I can follow at a respectful distance while you do. That nearly drew a laugh from her, which annoyed her more than his stubbornness. I'm going to Willow Bend, she said. So am I. Why? Because if Samuel made a second record, he would not have left it at the courthouse. Clara looked past him toward the street, where people pretended not to watch. Her humiliation was not over. It had merely changed shape. By sundown, Mercy Creek would have 10 versions of this story. Clara and the sheriff plotting together, Clara charming him, Clara lying so sweetly that a lonely widower forgot the law. She touched the soot on her sleeve. What happens if you are wrong? She asked. Gideon's gaze softened. Then I will stand beside you when they say so. It was the first answer he gave that did not sound like law. She walked to the livery without waiting for him. Willow Bend lay 9 miles west of Mercy Creek, where the prairie rolled down toward a creek lined with cottonwoods, and the wind carried the smell of sage, dust, and sun-warmed grass. Clara rose Samuel's old mare, Junie, a patient bay with one white sock, and a habit of sighing whenever men talked too much. Gideon followed on his gray gelding, keeping exactly the distance he had promised. Neither spoke for the first 3 miles. Clara watched the land instead. She knew every low hill and cattle trail, every wind-bent oak, every place where water pooled after spring rain. Samuel had taught her the names of grasses, as if he were introducing neighbors. Blue grama, needlegrass, wild rye by the creek. Land was never just land to him. It was memory with roots. At the 4th mile, clouds began gathering in the west. At the 5th, Gideon rode closer. You're angry, he said. That is observant. He accepted that with a nod. Most Junie flicked her ears as if agreeing. Gideon looked ahead. When I first took this badge, I arrested a man named Peter Lyle for killing a trader. 3 witnesses swore to it. I believed them. Pushed the circuit judge hard. Lyle was hanged in Cheyenne before the real killer confessed drunk in a saloon. Clara turned despite herself. Gideon's face had gone still, but not empty. There was old grief in it, worn smooth by being touched too often. My wife, Ruth, told me I had mistaken noise for truth, he said. I was too proud to hear her. She died of fever that winter, still disappointed in the man I had become. The wind moved between them. I'm sorry, Clara said, because anger could not survive untouched beside that kind of confession. He nodded once. After that, I stopped moving fast unless someone's life required it. Folks call it gentleness. Sometimes it is only fear wearing a better coat. Clara looked away toward the clouds. Samuel used to say caution is not cowardice if you are still walking toward danger. That sounds like him. You knew him well. Well enough for him to beat me at checkers and accuse me of letting him win. He accused everybody of that. For the first time that day, a small smile touched Gideon's mouth. It vanished when Willow Bend came into view. The ranch house stood in a shallow valley, whitewashed once but weathered now to gray. A barn leaned behind it, its red paint faded to brown. The windmill turned with a tired groan. Smoke did not rise from the chimney, but black marks stained the wall near Clara's bedroom window, where the fire had broken through. Clara's throat tightened. Gideon dismounted first and studied the ground before letting her step down. Someone rode in from the creekside, he said. I saw tracks this morning. Why didn't you tell me? I was busy being accused in town. He took that without reply. Inside, the house smelled of ash, wet cloth, and the faint lavender soap Clara used because Samuel once said, "Remind him of his mother." The back room had suffered most. The curtains were gone. Her writing desk was charred. The lockbox where she had kept the deed lay on the floor, blackened and open. Gideon crouched beside it, forced before the fire. I locked it, I know. He touched the broken latch with one finger. Who knew where you kept the deed? Samuel, me. She paused. Dr. Henley saw me put it there after Samuel died. He came to sign the death paper. Anyone else? Mrs. Tully came with soup. Caleb Crow came with condolences I did not ask for. Mr. Albright came to say the courthouse would record the transfer once the bridge reopened. She looked at him. Half the town passed through my grief like it was a public road. Gideon's jaw tightened. They searched until afternoon bent toward evening. Gideon checked floorboards, the hearth, the rafters, Samuel's roll-top desk. Clara searched the pantry, the linen chest, the Bible shelf, and the old trunk at the foot of Samuel's bed. Each empty place made the house feel less like home and more like a body being examined. At dusk, rain began tapping the roof. Clara lit a lantern. Its glow softened the burned edges of the room, but did not hide them. Gideon stood by Samuel's desk, holding a small ledger. "What is that?" she asked. "Cattle counts, payments, weather notes?" He turned pages carefully. Samuel wrote like a man arguing with the paper. He said neat writing was vanity. Gideon's finger stopped. "Listen to this." Crow came again. Offered half value. Refused him. Says railroad survey will change everything. Told him Willow Bend is Clara's when I am gone. He smiled like I'd made a joke. Clara closed her eyes. Gideon turned another page. There's more. Made final paper with Judge Hollis. Ring seal on fold. Copy hidden where Mary wept silver. Clara opened her eyes. "What does that mean?" "I was hoping you knew. Mary was Samuel's wife. She died before I came. He hardly spoke of her." Clara moved closer. Read it again. Gideon did. Copy hidden where Mary wept silver. Rain thickened against the roof. Clara sat slowly on Samuel's bed. "Mary had a looking glass," she said. "Silverback. It cracked the day she died, and Samuel kept it because he couldn't bear throwing it away." "Where?" "In the attic." "The attic." Ladder groaned under Gideon's weight. Clara followed with the lantern held high, though he told her once to wait below and did not make that mistake twice. Dust hung in the air. The attic was low and crowded with boxes, broken chairs, winter quilts, and jars Samuel saved, because a jar is a promise. In the far corner stood the looking glass under a sheet. Clara pulled the cloth away. The mirror was oval. Its silver backing darkened and cracked like frozen water. Gideon lifted it from the wall. Behind it, a narrow board had been pried loose recently. Empty. Clara's breath left her. Gideon ran his tomb along fresh splinters. Someone new. From the ledger. No. He looked at the small rectangle of dustless wood where something had rested for years. From Samuel. Samuel would never tell Crow, not willingly. Downstairs, a horse whinnied. Gideon blew out the lantern with one sharp breath and pulled Clara down behind a trunk. A board creaked below. Not the old house settling. A step, then another. Someone was inside. Clara's hand found Gideon's sleeve in the dark. His arm was steady beneath her fingers. He drew his revolver without sound. A man moved through the lower room. They heard the scrape of the lockbox being kicked, then the soft rip of paper. He was searching again. Gideon leaned close to Clara's ear. "Stay behind me." She shook her head, though he could barely see it. A match flared below. The smell of sulfur rose through the cracks. Clara understood before Gideon moved. Whoever had come was not searching anymore. He was burning what remained. Gideon dropped through the attic opening like a shadow. Clara came down the ladder behind him, lantern in one hand, Samuel's old shotgun in the other. She had never fired it at a person, but she knew the sound of loading it would make most men reconsider their plans. The intruder stood by the curtains with a match in his hand. Not Caleb Crow. Mr. Albright, the county clerk. His face went white. Gideon leveled his gun. "Drop it." The match fell and died on the floorboards. Albright raised both hands. "Sheriff." This is not what it seems. It seldom is when a man enters a burned house after dark with matches. Clara stepped into the room, shotgun held low but ready. You told me you wanted to help record the deed. Albright looked at her and something like shame passed over his face. I did. Then why? His mouth trembled. Because Silas Crow owns my mortgage, my brother's store, and the note on my mother's house. Because he said no one would be hurt. Because he said the girl was nobody. The girl. Clara felt the words land old and familiar. Nobody, Charity, foundling. A woman, without blood strong enough to matter. Gideon moved closer. Where is the copy? Albright swallowed. Gideon cocked the revolver. The clerk flinched. Crow has it, but not for long. He means to put it on tonight's freight to Denver with a man named Russ. Once it leaves, he says it becomes a disputed claim in territorial court. Years before anyone settles it. By then, Miss Whitcomb will be gone. Clara's hands shook, but her voice did not. Gone where? Albright looked away. Gideon stepped closer. Answer her. Crow arranged a position. Albright whispered, laundry work in Abilene. He said a woman without property must accept what mercy she is given. For a moment, the house seemed to hold its breath. Then Clara laughed once. It was not a happy sound. It was the sound of something breaking clean instead of bending. Mercy, she said. This town does love that word. Gideon lowered his gun slightly. Freight leaves when? Midnight. The clock on the mantel ticked toward 8. Gideon took Albright by the arm. You're riding with us, Albright sagged. Hell ruined me. You helped him try to ruin her. Outside, thunder rolled over the prairie. Clara looked around the room Samuel had built. The walls he had whitewashed, the floor he had worn down pacing during winter storms. She had spent the day trying to prove the ranch belonged to her. Now, as rain swept against the windows, she realized the deeper fight was not for acres. It was for the right to stand before the world and say she had been loved. Gideon turned at the door. Clara, you can stay here. I'll take Albright and... No. He stopped. She set the shotgun aside and reached for her coat. I have watched men carry my future away twice. Not a third time. The ride back to Mercy Creek was a black ribbon of mud, rain, and lightning. Gideon tied a rope from his saddle to Albright's horse, not because the clerk was likely to run in a storm, but because fear made men foolish. Clara rode behind them with her hat pulled low, rain streaming down her neck. Each flash of lightning showed the prairie in stark white, the bent grass, the creek swollen at its banks, Gideon's shoulders straight beneath his soaked coat. By the time they reached town, lanterns burned in the saloon, the depot, and the Crow Bank. The church bell was silent. The courthouse steps were empty where she had been judged that morning, though Clara could still feel every stare. Gideon brought Albright through the back door of the jail. Deputy Amos, a round man with a limp and a loyal heart, rose from his chair. Tommy Bell's asleep in the cell, Amos said. Wouldn't eat until I told him Miss Clara wasn't dead. Clara's chest tightened. Gideon removed his hat. Rain ran from the brim. Keep Albright here. No visitors. No exceptions with fine hats. Albright sat heavily on the bench, looking 10 years older. Deputy Amos glanced at Clara, then at Gideon. Crow's men are at the depot. Saw Caleb with 2 riders. Freight's taking on crates. Gideon checked his revolver. How many? 4 that I saw, Clara said. There might be another way. Both men looked at her. She wiped rain from her face. Crow wants the deed gone quietly. If you charge in with guns, he claims persecution. He says you threatened Albright. He says I bewitched you or bribed you or whatever tale Mercy Creek will swallow fastest. Gideon's mouth tightened because he knew she was right. Clara looked toward the depot, where the midnight freight gave a low hiss of steam. But he also wants respect. Men like him would rather bleed than be laughed at. What are you thinking? Gideon asked. That we make him opened the crate in front of witnesses. Deputy Amos blinked. How? Clara turned to the Rain Street window. Across the street, music and laughter spilled from the Golden Spur saloon. Ranch hands, freighters, gamblers, and half the town's unmarried men would be there waiting out the storm. Mercy Creek likes a spectacle, she said. Let us give them one. 10 minutes later, Clara walked into the Golden Spur with Gideon beside her and rain dripping from both of them onto the sawdust floor. Conversation faltered. The piano player stopped with one hand still raised. Caleb Crow stood at the bar with a glass in hand, telling a story loudly enough for men to buy him admiration. When he saw Clara, his smile widened. Well, he said, the little heiress returns. Clara felt every face turn. That morning, those eyes had nearly crushed her. Now they became tools. Witnesses. Memory. She walked to the center of the room. I need men with clean eyes, she said, or at least honest enough ones. A few laughed. Gideon stayed quiet beside her. Clara lifted her voice. Silas Crow has stolen the deed to Willow Bend Ranch and means to send it out on the midnight freight. Sheriff Hale can search the depot, but Crow will call it personal. He will say the sheriff is acting for me, not the law. So I'm asking any man here who has ever lost land to a paper he could not read, any man who has ever owed a bank more than he borrowed, any man who ever had Silas Crow smile while tightening a rope around his neck, come watch him. Deny it in public. Saloon went still. An old rancher named Ben Sutter pushed back his chair. Me North pasture turned into bankland after Crow found a fee I never heard of. Another man stood. He took my brother's team. The bartender crossed his arms. I can close early. Caleb slammed his glass down. You fools believe a foundling over my father. Gideon looked at him. Careful, Caleb. Caleb jabbed a finger toward Clara. She is nothing. Samuel Whitcomb pitied her. That does not make her blood. That does not make her heir. Clara's face burned, but she did not step back. No, she said. Love made me his heir. Paper only proved it. The words surprised her, not because they were untrue, but because she had finally spoken them where people could hear. For the first time, no one laughed. Then Mrs. Tully appeared in the saloon doorway, shawl clutched tight, rain spotting her spectacles. Behind her stood 3 church women, scandalized by their own location. Miss Clara, Mrs. Tully said, voice stiff. Tommy Bell's mother told us what happened. She said Crow's men threatened her room. Caleb cursed under his breath. Mrs. Tully's chin lifted. I have repeated unkind things today. I will not repeat them tomorrow. It was not an apology. Not yet, but it was a crack in the wall. Gideon opened the saloon door. Rain blew in, carrying the train's steam whistle. Then let's go here, Mr. Crow explained his freight. They move as a crowd through the storm. Men came from the saloon, women from the mercantile awning, the barber with his towel, the blacksmith with his hammer still in hand, 2 railroad porters, 3 ranch wives, and Mrs. Tully marching like judgment in wet shoes. By the time they reached the depot, Silas Crow stood under the platform lanterns with fury burning through his polished comb. Beside him were 2 crates, a leather valise, and Ellis Russ. Russ made the mistake of running. Gideon was faster. He caught him at the edge of the platform and drove him into a stack of flour sacks. Russ swung once. Gideon ducked, turned, and put him down hard enough to end the argument. The crowd gasped. Clara saw Gideon's face afterward, the brief flash of old fear that he had used too much force, judged too quickly. Russ groaned and rolled onto his side. Alive! Gideon exhaled. Silas Crow clapped slowly. A fine show, Sheriff. Have you brought the whole town to watch you assault travelers now? Clara stepped forward. Rain streamed from her hat brim. Open the valise. Silas smiled. No. Then open the crate. No. Gideon took out the silver ring. Under the depot lantern, it shone like a small moon. I have a sworn statement from Clerk Albright that you ordered him to remove Samuel Whitcomb's hidden deed from Willow Bend, Gideon said. I have a pawn slip connecting your man to Samuel's stolen ring. I have a boy who can testify your son paid him to steal that ring during a staged gunshot. I can open those crates with a warrant tomorrow, Silas, or you can open them now and spare what dignity you have left. Silas looked at the crowd, measuring it. For years, Mercy Creek had feared him in private and respected him in public. Now those two things had met under rain and lantern light, and respect was losing. Caleb stepped forward. Father, done. Silas' smile disappeared. He slapped Caleb so hard the younger man staggered. You careless idiot, he hissed. There it was. Not proof enough for court, perhaps, but enough for the town. Enough for every ear under the depot roof. Gideon moved between them. Open it. Silas stared at Clara. You have no idea what you are standing in the way of. The railroad spur comes through Willow Bend. That land will be worth more money than Samuel Whitcomb saw in his life. You think he gave it to you because he loved you? He gave it because he was senile and soft. Clara's voice shook, but it held. Then soft men build better homes than hard ones. Ben Sutter laughed once low and fierce. Others murmured. Silas' hands curled. The train conductor stepped down from the freight car. Mr. Crow, I want carry disputed legal goods. Not with the sheriff here. Silas turned on him. You are paid to carry what I pay you to carry. Not tonight. For one breath, no one moved. Then Ellis Russ, still on the ground, spat blood and said, In the valise, bottom lining. Silas closed his eyes. Gideon took the valise. Caleb reached for his pistol. Clara saw it before Gideon did. She stepped into Caleb's path and swung Samuel's heavy brass key ring with all the strength grief had stored in her arm. It struck Caleb's wrist. His pistol dropped and skidded across the wet platform. Gideon turned, seized him by the collar, and slammed him against the post. The crowd erupted. Caleb snarled at Clara. You should have taken the laundry job. Gideon's fist tightened in Caleb's coat. For a moment, Clara thought he might strike him. She saw the struggle in his eyes. The old lawman who had moved too fast, the widower carrying a dead wife's disappointment, the gentle sheriff who feared his own anger. Clara put her hand on his arm. Not for him, she said. Gideon looked at her. Rain ran down his face. Slowly, he released Caleb and pushed him toward Deputy Amos, who had arrived breathless with shackles. Arrest him, Gideon said. Conspiracy, theft, attempted assault. We will add what the judge allows. Deputy Amos grinned. With pleasure. Gideon opened the valise. Inside were shirts, bank drafts, a shaving kit, and beneath a slit in the lining, a folded paper wrapped in oilcloth. He handed it to Clara. Her fingers trembled so hard she almost could not untie the cord. Mrs. Tully stepped forward and held the lantern closer without being asked. The paper unfolded. There, brown at the edges but whole, was Samuel Whitcomb's deed transferring Willow Bend Ranch to Clara Whitcomb, adopted daughter of his heart and lawful heir by his hand. At the bottom was his signature. Beside it, pressed in dark sealant, were 3 wheat stalks from the silver ring. Clara covered her mouth. The world blurred. Rain, lanterns, the black shape of the train, faces watching. For 12 years she had belonged somewhere, because one stubborn old rancher said she did. For one terrible morning, the town had almost convinced her that love without blood was too fragile to stand in court. But here it was, ink, seal, name. Gideon's voice was low beside her. Read the last line. She blinked tears away and looked down. Below the legal words in Samuel's uneven hand was one sentence not needed by law at all. Let no man say this child was charity, for she gave me back my home before I gave her mine. Clara folded over the paper, not caring who saw her cry. No one spoke for a long time. Then the church bell rang once in the distance, though no one knew who had pulled the rope. By morning, Mercy Creek had changed its story. not all at once. Towns were like old doors. Even when the latch lifted, the hinges complained. Some people still whispered. Some claimed they had always doubted Silas Crow. Some remembered kindnesses they had not shown and polished them until they shone falsely. But the auction bell did not ring, and the courthouse steps stood empty. Silas Crow sat in the jail with his son and Alice Rusk, awaiting the circuit judge. Mr. Albright had given a full written confession by lantern light, his hand shaking so badly that Gideon had to blot the page twice. Tommy Bell and his mother were moved into the spare room behind the church, and Mrs. Tully, red-eyed and stiff-backed, announced that the sewing circle would provide meals without gossip, or she would know the reason why. Clara returned to Willow Bend with the deed wrapped in oilcloth and the silver ring tied on a ribbon around her neck until a safer place could be made. Gideon rode with her, not because she asked and not because he insisted, but because the road between town and ranch felt less lonely when both pretended it was practical. For 3 days, rain kept the creek high and the trail soft. Gideon stayed in the bunkhouse, repairing the broken latch, replacing burned boards, and helping old Ben Sutter drive in 6 head of cattle that had wandered through a down fence. Clara cooked for the men, mended what smoke had not ruined, and began cleaning the back room, one blackened plank at a time. The work changed them. In town, truth had come like thunder. At Willow Bend, healing came like dawn, slow enough that a person doubted it, until the room was full of light. Gideon spoke little while he worked, but his quiet was no longer distance. It had room in it. Clara learned that he hummed under his breath when measuring boards, that he gave horses full explanations as if they were jurors, and that he never entered a room without knocking, even one with no door. On the 4th morning, Clara found him behind the barn, trying to mend the hinge on Samuel's old chicken gate while the rooster attacked his boot. "You are losing to a bird," she said. Gideon looked down at the rooster. "I am negotiating." The bird appears firm. "Ha, has a strong position," she laughed before she could stop herself. Gideon looked up, and something in his expression warmed so suddenly that she turned away, pretending to inspect the fence. Her laughter felt strange in the yard after so much smoke, like a flower growing through ash. He returned to the hinge. "I have to ride to town this afternoon." The warmth thinned. "For the prisoners," she asked. "For court papers. And to send word to Judge Hollis." He paused. "I'll come back before dark if the creek allows." "You don't have to keep coming back." "No, sir." The rooster strutted between them, victorious. Gideon wiped his hands on a rag. "Do you want me to stop?" Clara looked toward the house. The new boards on the back wall were pale against the old gray wood. Not hidden, not pretending the fire had never happened, just stronger where it had been burned. "I don't know what I want," she said honestly. He nodded. "That is allowed." No man had ever told her that. Wanting had always felt dangerous. As a child, she had wanted her mother to wake from fever. She had wanted families in town not to look at her like a stray dog. She had wanted Samuel to live. Every want had become a room she was locked out of. Gideon picked up his hat. "Clara, I am not standing here because I think you need a man to keep your land. I know, and I am not asking for anything while your whole life is still covered in soot." She looked at him then. His eyes held hers with the same steadiness he had shown in the alley, on the depot platform beside the burned desk. But beneath it was a vulnerability that cost him something. "I only want you to know," he said. "When I ride back, it is not always for the law." The words stayed after he left. Clara worked through the afternoon with restless hands. She scrubbed smoke from the windows, beat rugs over the porch rail, and carried Samuel's ruined desk into the yard. In one drawer, swollen shut by water, she found a packet of letters tied with blue thread. They were from Mary, Samuel's wife. Clara sat on the porch as the clouds broke and sunlight spilled over the wet prairie. She read slowly, careful with the fragile paper. Mary wrote of planting beans, of wanting children, of Samuel's terrible coffee, of the silverback mirror he had bought her in Cheyenne, though they could not afford it. The last letter was unfinished. At the bottom, in a weaker hand, Mary had written, "If love cannot leave blood behind, let it leave shelter. Promise me someone lonely will laugh in this house again." Clara pressed the letter to her chest. The sun lowered. Gideon did not return. At first she told herself the creek was high, then that court papers took time, then that she was foolish to count hoofbeats. Near dusk, Junie lifted her head and nickered. A rider came over the east rise. Not Gideon. Deputy Amos galloped into the yard, mud to his knees and fear in his face. "Miss Clara," he called. "Get your horse." She was already moving. "What happened?" Crow broke loose on the road to county lockup. Caleb too. Rusk turned on them. Shots fired. Sheriff went after Silas alone toward the old mill crossing. Cold swept through her. "Alone?" Amos looked ashamed. "He told me to warn you," said Silas. "Come here for the deed." Clara ran inside and took the oilcloth packet from beneath the loose hearthstone, where Gideon had made a hiding place that morning. The silver ring still hung at her throat. Then she stopped. For 12 years, men had hidden things to protect her. Samuel had hidden the deed. Gideon had hidden his suspicions. Even Crow had hidden the truth, trusting secrecy to do violence before any gun was drawn. Clara took the deed, tucked it inside her coat, and lifted Samuel's shotgun from its pegs. Deputy Amos stared. "Miss Clara." She walked past him to the barn. "If Gideon rode toward danger for my home, I am not waiting in the parlor like furniture." The old mill crossing lay 2 miles north, where the creek narrowed between rock banks, and a ruined flour mill stood with half its roof gone. By the time Clara and Amos reached it, night had fallen blue over the land. Mist rose from the swollen water. Frogs called from the reeds somewhere ahead. A horse screamed. They found Gideon's gray gelding first, reins tangled in brush, eyes rolling but unhurt. Then they heard voices from the mill. Clara dismounted before Amos could stop her. She moved through wet grass toward the broken wall, shotgun in hand. Lantern light flickered inside. Silas Crow stood near the old grinding stone, with a pistol aimed at Gideon. Gideon was on one knee, one hand pressed to his side. Blood darkened his vest. Caleb stood behind his father, pale and shaking, his own gun loose in his grip. Silas' polished calm was gone. Rain, mud, and defeat had stripped him to the raw hunger underneath. "The deed," he said. "Call to her, Sheriff. Tell her to bring it." Gideon's voice was strained but steady. "She won't." Silas cocked the pistol. "You think love makes people brave. It makes them predictable." Clara stepped into the doorway. "Not always." All 3 men turned. Gideon's face changed first, fear, anger, relief, and something softer that had no time to live there. Silas smiled. "There she is. Mercy Creek's little miracle." Clara raised the shotgun. "Step away from him. You won't shoot. I hit your son with keys in front of half the town. Do not trust my manners." Caleb made a choked sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Silas held out his free hand. "Give me the deed and I walk away." "No, then he dies." Gideon's eyes never left Clara. "Don't trade it." Silas pressed the pistol closer to him. "Quiet." Clara's hands tightened on the shotgun. The mill smelled of wet stone, old grain, and gun smoke. She could hear the creek hammering the rocks below. She could also hear Samuel's voice, not in words exactly, but in the shape of every lesson he had given her. "Stand straight before fool. Love is not proven by losing yourself. Home is a thing you defend with truth first, and a gun only when truth is cornered." Clara slowly lowered the shotgun. Silas' smile widened. Then she untied the silver ring from her neck and held it up. "You never understood what you stole," she said. "You thought the deed mattered because of land. You thought the ring mattered because it marked paper. But Samuel wore it 40 years after Mary died, because it reminded him that promises outlive fear." Silas' face hardened. "Pretty words from a beggar." "No," Clara said. lawful owner of Willow Bend Ranch, she lifted her voice. Deputy Amos, I have the deed on my person, and I am standing witness that Silas Crow has threatened murder to take it. Amos stepped into the far doorway, revolver drawn. Heard every word. Silas jerked toward him. That was the moment Gideon moved. Wounded or not, he drove his shoulder into Silas' knees. The pistol fired into the rafters. Caleb shouted. Clara raised the shotgun but did not fire. Amos crossed the room and struck Silas' wrist with his revolver barrel. The pistol fell. Gideon rolled, grimacing, and kicked it into the shadows. Caleb dropped his gun without being asked. I'm done, Caleb whispered. I'm done. Silas lunged for the pistol in the dark. Clara stepped on his hand. He looked up at her with pure hatred. She looked down at him with none. That is enough, she said. By midnight, the prisoners were bound. Gideon's wound was bandaged with strips torn from Clara's petticoat, and the deed was in Deputy Amos' inner pocket on its way to be locked in the jail safe until the circuit judge arrived. Gideon sat on a fallen beam outside the mill, while Clara washed blood from her hands in creek water. The moon had broken through the clouds, silvering the current. His face was pale, but his eyes followed her as if she were the only steady thing in the night. You should not have come, he said. She wrung out the cloth. You keep saying things like that, and I keep ignoring them. One of us should learn. His mouth curved and tightened with pain. She knelt before him and checked the bandage. Dr. Henley will stitch it. I've had worse. I dislike that answer. I'll find a better one. For a while, they listened to the creak. Clara held the silver ring in her palm. It was scratched, smoke-dulled, and beautiful. Samuel rode back with this once, she said, after Mary died. He told me he had thrown it into the creek because grief made him foolish. Then he spent half a day in winter water finding it again. Gideon looked at the ring. Why, he said, a promise deserves better than his worst hour. The words settled between them. Gideon's voice was rough. Ruth deserved better than mine. Clara looked up. He stared toward the creek, but she knew he was seeing another room, another winter, another version of himself he could not forgive. She told me to listen, he said. I thought being right mattered more. After she died, I made gentleness into a penance. Like if I never raised my voice, never moved too fast, I could undo what pride had done. Clara closed her fingers around the ring. Did it help? No. He looked at her then. But you did. Her breath caught. He did not reach for her. He did not turn confession into claim. He simply sat wounded in moonlight and told the truth. You made me want to be gentle because the world is hard enough, he said. Not because I am afraid of myself. Clara's eyes stung. You made me want to stay. Not because I had paper. Because I was not standing alone. Gideon swallowed. Behind them, Deputy Amos called that the horses were ready. The moment passed, but it did not vanish. It walked beside them all the way home. The circuit judge arrived 3 days later in a mud-spattered coach with 2 armed marshals and a temper sharpened by bad roads. By noon, the courthouse was full again. Clara stood in the same place she had stood when the auction bell nearly rang, but everything was different. This time, Gideon stood beside her openly, one arm bandaged beneath his coat. Mrs. Tully sat in the front row with Tommy Bell and his mother. Ben Sutter leaned against the wall. Deputy Amos guarded Silas, Caleb, Rusk, and Albright, with a satisfied look of a man whose jail had never been so important. Judge Hollis read Samuel's deed aloud. No one whispered. When he reached the final line Samuel had written for Clara, his voice slowed. Let no man say this child was charity, for she gave me back my home before I gave her mine. Clara looked down at her hands. Judge Hollis removed his spectacles. The transfer is valid. Willow Bend Ranch belongs to Clara Whitcomb. A sound moved through the room. Not applause exactly, but breath released by many people at once. Silas Crow stared straight ahead, his empire already cracking. There would be trials, debts examined, forged claims uncovered. Men who had feared him for years began remembering where they had put receipts. Women who had lowered their eyes in his bank began lifting them. Mercy Creek did not become honest in a day, but it began. After the hearing, Clara stepped onto the courthouse porch. The sky was clear, washed clean by storms. Wagons rolled through mud ruts. The train whistle sounded beyond town. Somewhere a hammer rang from the blacksmith shop, steady as a heartbeat. Mrs. Tully approached with a basket in her hands. "Miss Clara," she said, stiff as a fence post, "I owe you an apology that will not fit in this basket." Clara looked at her. Mrs. Tully's mouth trembled. "I said things because other people said them first, and because saying them made me feel safely on the right side. That is a cowardly habit. I am ashamed." Clara accepted the basket. It smelled of bread. "Thank you," she said. Mrs. Tully nodded, wiped one eye, and marched away before kindness could embarrass her further. Gideon came to stand beside Clara. That might be the longest speech she has ever made without judging a hemline. Clara smiled. She judged mine with her eyes. Progress then. They walked together toward the hitching rail. His gray gelding stood beside Junie, both horses flicking flies in the sun. "What will you do now?" Gideon asked. "Repair the back room, replant the south garden, hire Tommy's mother if she wants steady work, buy 2 milk cows Samuel would say are overpriced." She paused. "Keep Willow Bend." "That sounds like a full life." "It could be." He nodded, looking down the street. There was something careful in his silence. Clara had come to know his silences now. This one was not retreat. It was a man standing at an open gate, waiting to be invited through. She reached into her pocket and took out the silver ring. "I am putting this in the ranch strong box," he said. "Not as proof. The deed is recorded now. 3 copies. Thanks to Judge Hollis, A.A. Wise precaution. But before I do, I wanted you to see it in daylight." She placed it in his palm. The ring looked smaller there than it had under storm lanterns, but no less powerful. Gideon ran his thumb over the wheat engraving. Clara said, "Samuel believed a ring was not ownership. It was remembrance. A promise you choose again after hard days." Gideon's hand closed gently around it. "Clara, I am not asking you to promise what grief, fear, or loneliness might make too heavy." He looked at her, eyes dark and intent. She stepped closer. "I am asking whether you might ride to Willow Bend sometimes when no one has stolen anything." The corner of his mouth lifted. "For chicken negotiations and fence repair, practical, and supper." His smile faded into something tender. "I would be honored." Clara took the ring back, but his fingers brushed hers, and neither moved away quickly. A month later, Willow Bend smelled of cut hay, fresh paints, and bread cooling in the kitchen window. The burned room had new walls. Clara did not hide the repaired place with curtains or furniture. She hung Mary's cracked silver mirror there, its broken backing catching light in fractured pieces. Beneath it, Gideon mounted a small shelf for the strongbox, and inside that strongbox lay Samuel's deed, 3 certified copies, Mary's letters, and the silver ring wrapped in blue cloth. Mercy Creek changed by inches. Tommy Bell learned to curry horses and read numbers from Clara in the evenings. His mother took over laundry for the ranch and laughed more after the first week than Clara had ever heard from her. Ben Sutter brought 2 milk cows and admitted they were overpriced before Clara could accuse him. Mrs. Tully came every Tuesday with bread and left with mending. Gossip no longer allowed past the front gate unless it had been washed clean, and Gideon rode out whenever duty allowed. At first he came with reasons, a paper to sign, a question from the judge, a warning about loose cattle. Then one evening he arrived with no reason at all, hat in hand, looking almost shy on the porch Samuel had built. Clara opened the door. "No theft today," she said. No, 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 escape banker. Not unless he is hiding in my saddlebag, she smiled. Then, I suppose you came for supper. I was hoping. He stayed until stars opened over the prairie. They sat on the porch after the dishes were done, listening to crickets and the low murmur of cattle beyond the barn. Lantern light grew through the kitchen window. The wind moved softly through cottonwood leaves. Gideon took something from his vest pocket, not Samuel's ring. A narrow silver band, plain and new, rested in his palm. Clara's heart began to pound. He did not drop to one knee. He knew her well enough not to turn her life into a performance. He simply held it where she could see. I had this made in Bent Rock, he said. No wheat, no seal, no proof of anything. Just a question. Clara looked from the ring to his face. I loved Ruth, he said. I will always honor that. But grief is not a house a man is meant to live in forever. You taught me that. Tears blurred the lantern light, he continued, voice low. I am not asking for Willow Bend. I am not asking because you need protection. You have proven half the county should ask protection from you. She laughed through the tears. I am asking, he said, because when I ride away from here, every road feels like it is pointing me back. And when I think of home, I no longer see a jail office or an empty room in town. I see this porch. I see Junie judging me from the rail. I see you standing in a doorway with flower on your sleeve and courage in your eyes. Clara covered his hand with hers. For so long, she had thought love was something that could be taken away by fever, fire, paper, or public shame. But love, real love, had proven stubborn. It rode through storms. It stood on courthouse steps. It waited in ashes and came back with a silver ring before the last proof could vanish. Yes, she whispered. Gideon closed his eyes, and the relief on his face was so open that she touched his cheek. He slid the new ring onto her finger. His hand trembled once, so did hers. They did not kiss like young fools in a dime novel. They leaned toward each other slowly, with the care of two people who knew what breaking costs. When their lips met, it was gentle, grateful, and certain. From the barn, the rooster gave one offended crow, though it was nowhere near morning. Clara laughed against Gideon's shoulder. Weeks later, when they married beneath the cottonwoods by the creek, half of Mercy Creek came. Judge Hollis spoke the vows. Mrs. Tully cried loudly and denied it louder. Tommy Bell carried the rings with the solemn pride of a boy trusted at last. On a ribbon tied around Clara's bouquet hung Samuel's silver ring, catching the sun. No one called her Charity. No one called him too gentle. When the vows were done, Gideon lifted Clara's hand and kissed the ring he had given her. Then Clara touched the old silver band on her bouquet, the one he had ridden back with through dust, danger, and doubt. The wind moved over Willow Bend Ranch, bending the grass in shining waves. The creek flashed bright beyond the trees. The house stood repaired behind them, its porch swept clean, its windows open, its rooms ready for laughter. And in the strong box beneath Mary's cracked silver mirror, the burn deed rested safe at last, not vanished, not hidden, not doubted anymore, but kept where it belonged, inside a home built by promises strong enough to survive fire.